the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
This is a special episode of History as It Happens. We are on location at Mount Vernon, inside the George Washington Presidential Library, to talk to its new executive director, historian Lindsay Chervinsky, about her exciting new job and what she envisions for this great institution. We're going to talk about her new book as well. Lindsay Chervinsky, thank you for having us here.
Oh, thank you so much for coming out and visiting and for this opportunity to talk about the work.
Yeah, on behalf of the Washington Times, thank you for the lunch today, too, at the Mount Vernon Inn. That was fantastic. So I guess that means I have to be nice to you for the rest of the...
Well, it's a great spot to enjoy a meal, either before or after a tour, or in our case, before or after a conversation.
That's right. Well, you've been on the podcast before, but not everyone listens to every single episode, and I didn't really introduce you to the audience because we were talking about how I tend to, not always, but tend to speak to the old guard of historians of the founding. So it's great to have, a fresh pair of eyes, a fresh perspective. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You've been a professional historian for 6-7 years, but you're not working in the academy.
That's right. So I'm a presidential historian. I did get the traditional academic credentials and all of those good, fun things that take many years. And then I decided to take a different path, and I've worked in the public history space. I was previously a historian at the White House Historical Association. I was affiliated with the Center for Presidential History and have continued to do work with Mount Vernon. So worked with them on their Teacher Institute and the Leadership Institute. I was a fellow here. And then they decided to have me back as executive director. And in that time was also publishing books. So this is just a really fun new chapter, a great way to share history with people in the broader audience, which is what has always been most compelling to me.
Well, congrats on the job. Congrats on your book. You wrote part of your dissertation here, didn't you?
I did. My dissertation was on the creation of the president's cabinet under George Washington's administration. And that eventually, many, many iterations later, became my first book, The Cabinet. But yes, it was a very good place to do work on the cabinet and very inspiring. If I needed a little kick in the pants, the reading room has the busts of all the people I was writing about. So that's always good inspiration. And if you ever really need motivation, I could walk across the street and go to the grounds in the mansion. So that's pretty helpful.
So you got the busts out there. You got Washington, obviously. I noticed a couple on my way in. I'm going to check out the room before I leave. I saw Jefferson. Who else is out there? I'm putting you on the spot already.
Gosh. So it's Washington, Hamilton, Franklin, Adams. Did I say Madison?
No.
Madison is there. I think, is Jefferson there too?
I think,
and
I did see him.
Okay,
who
so
you would expect, right?
Yes,
it's who you would expect.
Yeah, the one that sometimes throws people off is Franklin because he was a little bit earlier, or they don't know what Madison looks like. Those are usually two that stump people.
Well, Madison's not on the currency, so I might not even be able to.
He's shortchanged is really the problem.
Well, he was kind of short too.
He was quite tiny, actually.
Yeah, so I can relate. I'm short in stature, physically, not intellectually, although my listeners might disagree with me on that. But what an inspiring place to work. Did any of the busts whisper to you at all when you needed inspiration?
No, but they kind of had the Mona Lisa effect, which is depending on how your writing was going. They either felt very sort of ominous and disproving and judgmental, or very encouraging, depending on the day.
So we're going to talk about the role in the public discourse historians have. You said you wanted to get involved in public history after you got your PhD. You've now written 2 books. What does the executive director of the George Washington Presidential Library do every day?
Well, no day is the same as the one before, so it's hard to give a very specific answer. But in general, I have 3 buckets of my job. So the first bucket is I oversee the library, which includes the Center for Digital History, which is our podcasts, and our digital encyclopedia, and a lot of really fantastic online programming, including a really cool map collection, which is called Argo, A-R-G-O.
And people can find these at the Mount Vernon website.
They can find them all online.
Okay.
The second department is the library, so that includes like our books for people to read, and it includes all of our special collections. So the really cool old stuff, the maps, the letters, the books, the things that are really our treasures. The third department is the Leadership Institute. So we do a lot of programming for organizations and companies and people who work in the government to come and learn from history and figure out how to apply those lessons to their daily life. And then, of course, we have a very active program calendar, and that's for audiences of all ages and types on all different types of history. So those are sort of the buckets within the library. And so I oversee that. And thankfully, I have a fantastic staff. So I really am just overseeing it. I'm not actually doing a lot of the day-to-day stuff myself. The second big bucket is I am committed to maintaining my work as a scholar. If I'm going to be an expert on the presidency, I have to continue to be an expert on the presidency. And so while I'm taking a very brief hiatus from book writing while I get my feet under me and do a tour for this book, eventually there will be more books and articles and podcasts and all sorts of other types of scholarship. And then the last thing is I serve as a spokesperson for both the library, but also for the estate more broadly when I'm talking about the presidency and history and American history and understanding the historic context for our current moment. And that is work that I love to do because it is a very different type of challenge. You never really know what question is going to come next, and I like that.
Well, I was here a couple of years ago. I spoke to Doug Bradburn, the president of Mount Vernon, and Joseph Ellis. Of course, everyone knows Joseph. And I remember how beautiful it was. But, I had never been here before. When people visit Mount Vernon, they don't really come here. Mm-hmm. It's on the same property, and it's beautiful over here as well. But they go visit the mansion and the plantation and everything over there. This isn't a public library, so you're not a librarian putting books back on the shelf saying it's a late fee here and you owe me $5. It's not a public library, but it is very much a library. I mean, isn't that its central purpose, right, to act as a research institute, or is that where you want it to become more of?
Well, that has certainly been its core. The first decade, the goal was really to build out our foundation as a place where people can come work on fantastic historical scholarship and then find ways to share it with the public. Because the library is not that old, it really is only 10 years, that really was our initial focus. And I think we've done really well with that. If you look at the explosion of scholarship on the early republic and especially on Washington, I think a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of it is attributable to having a place that wants to support that type of work, to encourage scholars to come, whether they be graduate students or senior scholars, to come and to do research and to write. And even if the resource that they're looking for is not here, just having a place to think about those things and work on those things is really essential. I think going forward, we absolutely have to maintain that core because at the very base of our mission, it's to encourage and promote and share history knowledge about Washington's life and his lifetime and his legacy more broadly. But I think that there's a broader public contribution that we can make that moves beyond just research in the 18th century.
What do you think that should be?
Well, one of the things that I think was Washington's greatest strengths was he was not afraid of difficult conversations. He surrounded himself by design with people who disagreed with him and with each other and sought out sometimes quite contentious conversations so that he would have all of the information and be able to make the best informed decision. And he believed that everyone should do that, which is why he liked the idea of a national university where people could come and learn about one another and talk through these things. And I think the library can serve as a forum in that way for the country, but also the DC community more broadly. We are uniquely blessed with universities, think tanks, intelligence agencies, a very diverse and broad array of knowledge and expertise and worldview. And I would love to bring them in more to have those difficult conversations about the challenges that are facing us today, informed through history.
While also avoiding presentism, of course. But we were chit-chatting a little bit before we came in here about how, people say, roll their eyes, oh, it's the founding fathers, we got to go back to the 18th century. Our hands are not tied by these guys. They've been dead for 200 years. The country has changed. Our problems today were their problems, the fate of the republic. How do you have this experiment in self-government continue? And we're still living in their political architecture. amended 27 times, or however many times it is. I'm going to fail my civics test right here. We had the second founding, as Eric Foner calls it, of course, after the Civil War, Great Depression, World War II. You may even call that a third founding. Very much what the founders put in place is relevant today. I mean, it sounds like an obvious thing to say that you wouldn't have to go there, but some people do kind of have that attitude about them. No, we don't need these old white guys from the 18th century anymore.
So the longest national written constitution is the United States Constitution. And so although you're right, it has been amended, we are still working with this framework. And I think one of the things that makes this period so interesting and so relevant is that history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. So if I was to describe to you the challenges of the 1790s, I would be talking about pandemics, the threat of political violence, concerns about immigration and xenophobia, who belongs as a citizen, foreign interference in elections, contested elections. I mean, these are things that we have grappled with again and again in American society. And partly maybe it's just because that's how we are as Americans, but partly it's also because of the way our society is structured as a republic is quite different than how it would be structured if we had a single ethnic or religious base like a lot of other nations do. And so the things that they were grappling with are inherently going to be a lot of the things that we are grappling with. Actually, their best legacy is that they were keenly aware, they had egos, but they were keenly aware that they were not all-knowing and that they were fallible and that there were things that they did not have solutions for. And they hoped that their legacy would be one of constant improvement. That's why the Constitution says to create a more perfect union, not a perfect one, a more perfect one. And so if we can embrace that legacy of let's try and continue to make it more perfect, I think that that is actually what they should be remembered for, and it's actually therefore a very usable legacy. And
George Washington, in his farewell address, warned about the dangers of factionalism or local jealousies. He was worried about having a large republic. Could it survive? Foreign interference was on his mind as well. Any number of things that, in a different context, those broader issues still apply today. So this then fits in with your role as a public historian. Some historians are not happy weighing in on current events. They avoid the media spotlight, or maybe they're not even sought out. These days, especially, historians are sought for information. They're on TV a lot. You want to make history accessible, right? I mean, there's no substitute for reading a long book or any length book, right? The scholarship. But there are other ways to reach people, right?
Yeah, one of our goals is to try and reach people where they are, because I do think that actually a lot of Americans genuinely want to understand more about the American nation, about our government institutions, about how we got to where we are, especially as we've been living through a period where the word unprecedented is used a lot.
My least favorite word, by the way. I try to avoid it, although vibes is now catching up to that in the least favorite category. Go ahead.
The feelings that we are living through these historic times has caused people to want to understand how we got here, what were previous historic times like, how did we get out of it, what should we learn from it. So one of our goals is to try and reach people where they are, to help them find good history, to help them answer those questions in a way that is accurate and includes the full story, but is also accessible, to your point. And what's really important is there are some things that are unprecedented, but knowing what has happened before and what hasn't is really important, because it helps us to understand, what really is a grave threat, how to address it.
I feel like it gives me perspective, and it's a calming influence. The sky is not always falling. We've been through some tough times before, and we have that experience of 230 years or whatever it is, as a democratic republic to get through things. So we've got through a civil war, we got through a Great Depression and World War II. And you said before, we call the Constitution a framework. I think that's a great way of putting it. It's not a set of truths, it's a framework where now we can debate what is true or false. You also mentioned about how the founders disagreed on any number of things, including who are the proper inheritors, or who are the right heirs of the American Revolution, who are upholding the legacy of the revolution correctly. I mean, this came up immediately in the 1790s. You had two competing philosophies about this. What I'm trying to get at here in my usual meandering way, Lindsay, there's a notion out there that, the founding fathers agreed on things, or there was one proper way of interpreting the American Revolution and the Constitution. Some people may even call that originalism, right? So today, some people are just vexed or flummoxed by the disagreements because their side says, no, this is how the founding fathers wanted it. When in fact, as you know, the founding fathers disagreed on everything.
with the exception of maybe they all agreed that they didn't want a king.
Yes.
That is probably like the one thing that they all agreed on. And everything else, if someone said the founding fathers thought, usually they're full of hogwash, because the founding fathers rarely thought anything together. If anything, they thought that the other side was wrong. That actually, I think, to your point, is actually quite comforting, because it means that there have always been multiple perspectives about what the future of the nation should be, who is, quote unquote, the ideal citizen, who should the government be investing in, what sort of approach to foreign policy should we take. And those different perspectives are, I think, one of our strengths, and I take a great comfort in knowing that discordance has always been there. Now, that's less useful if you're going to put it on a bumper sticker than, saying this is what the founding fathers thought, and it's less useful as a political tool for trying to achieve a certain aim, but it is fact, and as John Adams said, facts are stubborn things.
So Twitter is a pretty awful place. It's not even called Twitter anymore. It's still pretty bad. It's X now. I do see some historians there, and I won't name names, who can come off as condescending or even nasty to people who maybe don't see things the way they do. You're an educator in addition to all your other roles. Essentially, you're an educator, right? You just wrote a book for public consumption. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that issue? Able to convey the truth or what you believe is the truth in a way that will persuade people. We don't have, you want to turn this into a headquarters for conversation, right?
Well, I think it goes back to my point of, trying to reach people where they are. Social media obviously can be a toxic sludge fest, but it also can be an incredibly useful tool for outreach, and you can reach different people and new people and help them learn things. And my approach has always been that as long as it appears that someone is trying to act in good faith, then I will not dismiss a question or ignore a question or even ignore a constructive criticism. And usually it's pretty easy to tell if they're acting good faith and if they're not. I don't think it's useful to berate people. I don't think it's useful to be condescending in that fashion. There are times when you get a troll and then they're really asking for it, but I generally try not to feed the trolls if I can help it. But I just don't think it's useful because it's not going to convince anyone. It's going to make them feel stupid. It's going to make them feel like they can't ask questions, which is the exact opposite of what we are trying to do. And so, of course, you're right, Twitter, X, or whatever we want to call it, is not always a place for a whole lot of nuance. It can be difficult to explain complexity. But as a starting point, it's great to share things with people and encourage them to learn more. And that's how I mean, even if it's, people would often say, what do you think of the musical Hamilton? It's great art. It's very entertaining. I love it. And no one has ever said to me, I watched Hamilton and therefore I know everything there is to know about American history. They say, I watched Hamilton. What really happened? Tell me more. And so if it is encouraging people to learn, then that is a gift and what we want to be doing.
I saw Hamilton here in D.C. I had trouble following the story. I mean, I kind of understood what was happening with the revolution and all that, but I enjoyed all the dancing and the choreography and all that. It was an amazing piece of art, yes.
Well, when I first saw it, I had just finished my dissertation, and my dissertation overlaps with it so closely that it was like watching my work come to, obviously it was not my work, but it was like watching my work come to life, and so I cried for 3 hours.
Well, there you go. and my chair is squeaking underneath me here. I'll try to keep it silent so people don't think there's something going on inside this studio, like, I don't know, a ghost or something from the 18th century.
I've never heard a report of anyone seeing Washington's ghosts, but I suppose there could be a first time for everything.
So, yeah, well, the creaking walls and the floor panels and all that, you never know. It's just my chair. So here in the library, the Washington Papers, these are not the originals. You were telling me about there's something exciting going on with the Washington Papers. What's happening?
Yes. So the originals are at the Library of Congress, and they are not going to give them back. Even if we ask nicely, I guess I understand why they won't do that. So one of the amazing things that has totally revolutionized scholarship are these editorial collections. And there are editorial collections of the Adams Papers and the Jefferson Papers and the Madison Papers and, of course, the Washington Papers. So Mount Vernon, in partnership with UVA Press, has been putting together the edited collection of Washington's papers. There are the Revolutionary War series, there's the Colonial series, there's the Presidential series, the Retirement series, the Diaries. And there are some offshoots as well. And when all of that is done, so those volumes are both published, they're also made available online. You can go to founders.archive.gov to see them and to search all of these collections, which is an incredible resource. But once the papers themselves are done, all of the scans, so basically the way these volumes are put together is the editors go to collections and archives across the globe, and they find the originals and they get scans. All of the scans will come then to the library, and it will be the most complete set of Washington papers anywhere, because we will be getting scans of the papers that Washington sent to other people. So when they're in places like England or Massachusetts or whatever. So we will be bringing all of those to the library. They will be here. We haven't quite figured out exactly what sort of digital projects we want to do with them, but they will be at some point accessible and will be an amazing resource.
How many years would it take? Can somebody do this in a single lifetime, make their way through every single available paper that George Washington wrote?
Yes. First of all, it helps if they have been transcribed, because that does make the process better. So that is one of the gifts of the editorial projects, is they transcribe the writing for you. So some people have great handwriting and some don't.
Well, all those books out in the main reading room there, some of those are volumes of his papers, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So those are the transcribed, edited collections. You could do it. It would take you a very long time. I think there are over 100,000 documents.
As you've leafed through some of those books for your research, a lot of it is just mundane stuff, right? You have to dig to find the part that really resonates today.
It's both a challenge, but it also gives you an accurate sense of what life was like, in that as you go through the volume, you'll see that on one day, Washington was, for example, writing to his cabinet secretaries, asking them to come to his office the following day for a meeting. And then the next minute, he's writing a letter to his plantation manager talking about where he wants a particular crop planted or a rotation item. And then he's writing to a merchant wanting to buy something or pay for something. And then he's writing to his stepson or his step-grandson to scold them for, being ne'er-do-wells. And it gives you the complexity of life that people actually live today. When we sit down to our desk in the morning, we very rarely just write about one thing. We might write an email to one person and then call a friend, so it gives the full variety of life, but it is why you can't just do a keyword search or look for something in particular, because you have to actually dig through everything that they were
You're immersing yourself. Did he keep a diary, George Washington?
Sometimes.
You said that in a certain way, like you're annoyed at him or something.
I am annoyed with him because both Washington and Adams kept very robust diaries, except for when they were president.
Oh, man.
Really annoying. And Washington did, in the initial months of his presidency, he kept a diary. And then when he marched west with the militia during the Whiskey Rebellion, he kept a diary. And when he did his southern journey in 1791, he kept a diary. But otherwise, he did not. And to be fair, his diary is never as full as emotion and thoughts as John Adams is, but at least it was something. We knew who he was talking to and what he was doing. But yeah, during the presidency, they both did not, and I cursed them for it.
Well, yeah, Adams did not hold back. I asked because I've listened to some of the Nixon tapes. Now, when I say some, I'm talking about a tiny percentage, because they are voluminous. Yeah, it takes years and years and years for teams of researchers to go through these, and they only get to part of it. But a lot of it isn't very interesting. You're looking for the smoking gun. It is on one tape in an enormous amount of audio that you have to sift through to listen to, and it takes up maybe, 20 or 30 seconds of that one tape. But there it is. It's like the difference between actually researching and writing the book and then me being the customer and just reading and getting to the good stuff. We're in the library here, but over on the main property, there's some interesting projects underway at Mount Vernon, right, that tourists and visitors will be seeing in the near future, right?
So yes, we have two huge projects that are underway. So the first is we are completely redoing our education center, which is our visitor center. All new exhibits and audio and visuals and digital interactives that cover the breadth and depth of Washington's life and his lifetime. And then the second big project is we are completing a revitalization of the mansion. And this is doing everything from shoring up the foundation to shoring up the roof. And it is the type of project that takes decades to plan and will also ensure the mansion's survival for another 150 years. But it is when you're thinking about the historic materials and the historic preservation and the requirements of preserving the house so it doesn't fall down. It is a huge project.
So the exhibits, the information that's presented, I guess you would call those the panels. So when you're redoing the panels, I mean, this is Mount Vernon. If you guys don't have the story right, no one will get it right. So that's a major project, right? And so what is it about the panels that needs to be updated? Because I'm talking about the fundamental stuff here about Washington's life that has been known for a very long time.
Well, some of it is, you want to refresh the design, you want to refresh the experience. You also want to refresh what is emphasized and what is shared and what type of lives you're weaving with Washington. So, for example, when previously there were exhibits on the presidency, for example, maybe they would talk about some of his precedents. But one of the things that I love about this exhibit design is it's going to take you into a space that puts up an image so you can see what the president's house would have looked like from the interior. And that space no longer exists. And so this requires the sort of digital tools to actually create that image and that visual for you standing in that space. And so a lot of it is experiential. It's wanting people to understand what it felt like in the room, what it would have been like to be in that conversation. The dates and facts of Washington's life, you're right, those are not changing, those are not shifting. But we want to make sure that, per our conversations earlier, that slavery is present throughout because it was interwoven into every part of life in the 18th century. We want to make sure Native Americans are included. We want to make sure Washington's military leadership is highlighted. So there are a lot of different things that are going to be either emphasized more or brought forward, make sure women are included in this story, and then also make the experience refreshed and I think more enjoyable for the visitor.
A realistic reflection of a home. Right?
Absolutely.
It wasn't just one person living here, and there were people here who did a lot of work. They were enslaved people who probably built the place, I'm guessing. I go to Monticello every September for my birthday, and they've done a great job there of modernizing the exhibits and the stories they tell. Matter of fact, the one I'm going to see this time is going to be the Women of Monticello. I haven't seen that tour yet. They're always updating their tours, but this can get sensitive. Some people get annoyed when there's maybe too much emphasis on one part of the life of Washington or another. How do you handle that here as an institution? Because you need to tell the truth. You're not here to cater to people's feelings, but you also have to be willing to listen to your customers, right?
Yeah, it's really hard because, if we get, let's say we get 600,000 visitors, those 600,000 visitors are going to come in with very different backgrounds in terms of the information they know and what they have learned and when they learned it and where they learned it. And so we have to try and design a visitor experience that can kind of capture as much of the middle experience, the middling knowledge as we can. And we want them, let's say they come in and they don't know much about Washington. We, of course, want to include the basic facts of who he was and what he did. But we also want to make sure that they are getting something about life here on the plantation and who was working here and who Washington would have seen on a daily basis. What that means is you're never going to be able to please everyone because everyone is going to want something different. And so, hopefully we can try and supply some of those interests through additional tack-on tours. So if you're really interested in the Revolutionary War, for example, we have Revolutionary War weekends where you can come and you can see what the tents would have looked like and see more of that experience. If you want to dig deeper into the enslaved experience, we have more tours on that subject that you can learn more and go visit the spaces in more detail and with more time. But it is impossible to please everybody. And so the best thing that I think we can do is try and present as much of the full picture and start a conversation. That means that there are probably going to be some difficult questions because history is messy and complex. But if we are starting a conversation, then I think that's a victory.
The Revolutionary War camp that you guys had here, I was actually going to come that day, but then it started pouring rain, and I thought that might not be so much fun. I actually wanted to see if I could learn how to fire a musket. For what reason, I don't know, but I thought it just might be a fun thing to do. But
They're really heavy. Yes. They are really, really heavy.
Yeah, from what I understand, being a soldier in those days was not a fun experience. I don't think it's ever been fun in any period in history, but especially not then. Something I've discussed with historians in the past is, the age-appropriate exhibits as well. You got a lot of kids coming here as well. Slavery, colonialism are pretty nasty, bloody businesses. I don't know how far an institution like this wants to go in depicting the violence and the blood and the dehumanization that comes with an institution like human chattel slavery, especially with a figure like George Washington. I think a lot of people want to come here and want to leave, I don't want to generalize, but you want to leave feeling good about this man who was so important in American history. But at the same time, we can't neglect, even at a plantation like Mount Vernon, where maybe it wasn't as brutal or savage as some other places, it's still dehumanizing, and slavery was a violent institution.
Well, in my experience, and granted, I am not an elementary school teacher, but in my experience, kids are actually remarkably capable of holding multiple complex thoughts in their heads. And they actually ask some of the best questions because they're not usually thinking about the implications of those questions, or they're not as worried about making people uncomfortable. So sometimes they really cut to the heart of the point in a way that is quite impressive and useful. There are ways to share these subjects and share the lived experience of the people here without necessarily dwelling in some of the gruesome details of what it meant to have slavery as part of the institution, or dwelling in the deadly consequences of colonialism. I think we can discuss those things and discuss the consequences and discuss what it meant. For example, kids can understand what it means to have your children taken away from you. They can fully grasp that, and it's going to upset them. But that's a really good conversation to have. There's always like this fine line, and this is true in scholarship and any type of reenactment, is when do you cross the line between trying to depict something honestly and almost like having a fetishization of the violence? And so you really don't want to do that. And one great way, I think, not to do that is to include the descendant community, because they have, rightfully so, strong opinions about how these things should be shared and have thought deeply and carefully about what's the best way to share the history while not dishonoring their ancestors. And so that is something that we want to do, and we are doing, and we are working on an oral history project, but it can always be done more. And so I think especially with children, sometimes interpreters, sometimes descendant communities, they do a really great job of having those conversations because they have to have those conversations with their own children. And so they are great models for us to learn from.
Oh, that's a great point. I mean, because this is their history as well. I mentioned Monticello only because I've just gone there over the years more than I've gone here. Sorry, I'll get here more
rectify
often.
It.
Well, at Monticello, after Thomas Jefferson died shortly after, many of his slaves were sold away and families were separated right there on the property. Now, the tour guides mention this there. They don't do any type of reenactment of anything, but they do have people walking around with a fife and drums, and they have a Thomas Jefferson reenactor. I always leave Monticello feeling Thomas Jefferson was a significant and inspiring figure, but I embrace the complexity. I come away feeling troubled. But I think people should leave a place like that with mixed feelings because of our origin story is complicated.
Yes, we are a very messy nation. We've always been a very violent nation. If you come away feeling like purely positive and happy about all aspects of our history, it probably means that you're not fully grasping the history. But I think that is actually a reflection of humanity. Like, none of us are purely good. None of us are perfect. We all have our flaws. And so we should not look for a history that is flawless.
That's a great note to wrap up this part one of our two-part series here, because we're going to get into some of the messiness that was there even as George Washington was still president, and then that his poor successor had to deal with, his name, John Adams. We're going to continue our conversation here at Mount Vernon with Lindsay Chervinsky and her new book, Making the Presidency, John Adams and the Precedents That Forged the Republic. Oxford University Press. Publication date September 5, right? But, and your publisher did not tell me to mention this, you can pre-order now. We'll be back with Lindsay Chervinsky at Mount Vernon.